Alright folks, welcome back to the shop today. What we have here is a Winchester Model 94. Probably one of the most iconic firearms in the US. It was designed by John Browning. Like many things from Winchester, John Browning designs. Obviously started production in 1894. They were produced under the Winchester name, the actual Winchester name, until the 80s, and they got changed up from there. They got bought out. The only corporation sold Winchester firearms to the employees. The employees created U.S. Repeating Arms Company. After they did their bankruptcy thing, it got sold off to FN, and we'll go through some more of that here in a minute. It was produced all the way up until 2006 when all production on, or at least U.S. production, ceased on them completely. There's a couple of them that are come out, like limited edition stuff made by Morocco in Japan. It's the first commercial American repeating rifle to be used with smokeless powder. In 1894, it was originally chambered in 3240 and 3855. 1895, they changed the metallurgy and the receivers themselves to accept higher pressure cartridges for smokeless powder. And that's also when they introduced the 30 Winchester centerfire, as we know it, 3030. This particular model, the gun in front of me now, I think was built in 1948, and it's still marked with 30 WCF, so 30 Winchester centerfire. They did not. They were called model 1894s until I want to say 1931 or 32. And that's when they changed the name to just Model 94. And that stayed the nomenclature for it all the way till the end of its production. So if you see one that you can get a serial number on that is produced prior, I'm going to say, let's say prior to 1931, 31 and older, if the barrel's marked 94, Model 94, and not Model 1894, it's been rebarreled. It's not an original gun. I've come across a couple of those. People think they have 100% original guns. And you have to give them the bad news that at some point in its life it has been rebarreled. Later on, after they the 3030 cartridge came out in 1895. 1899 they came out with a 32 Winchester Special, which is just a necked up 3030 cartridge, just a little bit heavier bullet, but ballistics are almost identical. So it hits a little bit heavier. I have a pre-64 model, which is what this is, in 32 Winchester Special, and it's a hell of a gun. Great cartridge. After the 1892 went out of production completely, they started producing the 94 and the pistol cartridge stuff, so that's when you started seeing the 38 357 mags, the 44 Special 44 mags, 45 Colts, 3840, 4440. Typically the magazines would hold 9 to 13 rounds in those pistol calibers, depending on the length of barrel. Later on, they had, I know, like goofy cartridges like the 7030 Waters, which is a 3030 neck down to 7mm. It's a real goofball. They even made one of these in 410. It was called the 9410 model. The caliber configuration these were in has been all over the board throughout the years. The United States government bought a couple of these in World War II, about 1,800 of them, and I think something like 50,000 rounds of ammo. They were sent up to the U.S. Army Signal Corps in the Pacific Northwest for some timber cutting when they were, getting the wood to build their planes and stuff for the war, and the Signal Corps used them there. Those serial numbers for those, I think, are 835,800 to 852,500 serial number range. I think they were marked, the serial numbers were marked up here instead of on the bottom. I think they were marked on top with their serial numbers, and they would have the bursting bomb ordnance symbol stamped into them along with U.S. And after the war, those were sold off as surplus. So those floating around, I'd imagine those probably pull a pretty high price tag. The Royal Navy purchased a bunch of them too, about 5,000 of them, and they used them for shipboard guard duty and mine clearing. France bought 15,000 of them, and they had sling swivels on the left side of the gun at the barrel band, and then down here on the stock. And they used metric graduations on their sights. Those were also sold off surplus after the war. Because of that, you'll see, if you find one with Belgian proof marks on it, that's where it came from. It was a French surplus gun that they, when they sell them to the commercial market, those in Europe, they have to be proofed by an actual proofing house, not just the manufacturer. So they had to be proofed before they could be sold to the commercial public. It was used again in World War II by Canada. Their Pacific Coast Rangers to guard the West Coast against Japanese invasion. I'm not sure of anything after of like official use during World War II after that. I'm sure it did have use, but not officially. There's been 3 major changes to the design of the gun, and every change essentially came along with the gun Winchester being sold. So there was a 1964, which is the biggest change to the guns that happened. There's another one in 1982, and then there was another one in 1992. And all those changes came about, again, every time that the company was sold off. And in 64, John Olin resigned as president and CEO, and so the company really didn't care about Winchester as a manufacturer of arms. They were a commercial chemical production company, and so they wanted to make it cheaper. In 1964, they started using sintered steel instead of machined receivers and stuff. So what they did was, instead of a solid block of steel and they machined everything out, they took this kind of a mold, and it had powdered steel that they filled it full of powdered steel and then heated it up, not to the point of melting, but just enough to it doesn't melt, but the powdered steel bonds on the molecular level, so, but it doesn't actually melt it. You have to look that science up. But they use sintered, like a sin turd, like you turded out a sintered, not centered. Another thing that they did was the cartridge carriers on these things, which we'll go into here. They were machined, and in 64 they went to a stamped version of it. Some of the pins and stuff in the gun, instead of being solid steel pins, they changed them to like roll pin type stuff, like spring roll pins. I don't know how much that was done realistically. I don't think a whole lot, but they did make some of those changes. Some people believed that the sintered metal was not as strong as the machined steel. I don't know of a whole lot of cases of those guns actually blowing up. Winchester, after 64, they took a pretty hard hit. People were pretty pissed at them, because even the Model 70s take some major changes that people didn't like. The other problem with sintered steel is that it doesn't take traditional bluing very well, and because of that, they had to pull some really weird tricks to get the guns to blue. Because if you try to blue that sintered steel, kind of like a lot of Ruger guns, if you see those, that they have like this kind of a plum color to them, it's because their Rugers are cast, and casting doesn't take traditionally bluing very well, and you see that in guns. And they were running into that problem with these, post 64 guns. So what they did is they would send the receivers off, and they would copper plate them, and then iron plate over the copper plating, and then blue the guns. So that iron, that black iron plating, would take a deep dark blue, and that's why you see those post 64 guns that as they wear through, they get this weird gold tint where they wear. That's the copper plating that's being worn through, and you're getting back down to bare steel. The other change came in 82, and that's when Olin Corporation sold the company off to the Winchester employees, and they created the U.S. Repeating Arms Company. And up until that point, especially in the 70s and stuff, some very high quality glass scopes and stuff were coming out, and people were getting really interested in magnified optics. And these guns, being a top eject gun, you couldn't mount a scope over the center of the bore. You had to either mount them offset to the side, or some sort of like scout type rifle long eye relief scope up here. And people didn't care for that much, and you'll see a lot of these older Winchesters have all kinds of goofy mounts that are offset and crap like that. Up until the optics came cheap, what they did traditionally was put peep sights on the Tang. They'd drill and tap this Tang and put a little fold-up leaf sight, or it was an aperture sight, and that actually creates a really good sighting system. It increases the sight radius on them, and they're much more accurate that way. So what they did in 1982 was they created the angle ejects. And those models, those receivers are cut down here a little bit lower. And when the gun ejects, it kicks it off to the side this way. And you could mount optics, over the bore line. And they were trying to... That came, the Marlin 336s, they all pretty much were side eject guns, so you could always have a scope on those, and Winchester was trying to keep up. U.S. Repeating Arms Company, they went bankrupt in like 89, and by 92, F.N. Hurstville bought out the Winchester name. In 1992, they made another change to the gun. So when FN took over, they went back to machine the receivers and stuff out of solid blocks of steel, which everybody thought was great. Same thing with they were trying to increase they were trying to make the name popular again, the Winchester name popular again. They were trying to rebuild everything. They also wanted to go international sales with it. And part of having to do that is they had to get rid of the half-cock notch on these hammers. This was the only real, either carrying it with no round in the chamber, an empty cartridge in the chamber, or you could carry it with a live round in the chamber and put it on a half-cock notch like that. So all you had to do is just cock it and fire it, or run the lever and get a round in there and fire it. That was the only safety up until 92. And then what they did, FN, is they put this goofy crossbolt safety on the receiver itself, and it looked ugly as sin, and it really screwed up the look of the gun. And a lot of people were angry for them for that. They were happy that it was all machined again and being much higher quality parts, but that Tang Safety really pissed people off. So in 2003, what they did is they went to a Tang Safety. They moved the safety back here on the Tang, like, I don't know, Marlin had been doing for years. And that kind of appeased people. Nobody really gave a crap about having a safety on it. They just didn't want that stupid crossbolt safety. So they moved it back here, and it became a little bit successful until the ultimate demise. All Winchester production ceased in the United States in 2006. The Model 94s occasionally come out in limited editions after that. They're built by Moroku in Japan. A lot of Winchester and Browning stuff had been produced by Moroku over the years. So that's not a real shocker. All that stuff being said, what we're going to do now actually is we're going to get into tearing this thing apart. As far as the action itself is concerned, there's some pretty specific ways you've got to take this gun apart. Excuse me. It's still early. I tend to want to pull a stock off first, just because it gives me a shorter thing to work with. So that's what we're going to do. These screws, if you've got an example of a gun that's in really, really good shape, make sure you're using, like with anything else I talk about, the right screwdriver bits. You don't want to screw these screws up. This gun looks like it's had not a rough life, but it's been apart a couple of times at least, so I'm not terrified of boogering a screw, but I still don't want to do any more damage than has already been prior done to it. Pull that stock screw out, the Tang screw, and they're probably pretty tight, so there we go. Pull that out, and that's all there is to that. And now we've got a little bit shorter package here to work with, and we're not trying to swing that big old long thing around. The next thing that we're going to want to take off, and since I'm going to put this thing through the cleaner anyways, I'm going to go ahead and start putting screws and stuff in the baskets. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to pull the lever and stuff out, so we need to get this little itty bitty screw here out. Use this little guy here. Sometimes there's some like either rust or dirt or whatever else in these slots, and you might have to clean all that stuff out to get the screwdriver bit to seat completely in the screw. Take your time with them, man. Don't get in there and just crank the crap out of them. It keeps you from scratching up your receiver and stuff. Once that screws out, we can punch out this guy. It is a rounded pin on these pre-64s, and the post-64s, that screw doesn't exist here. It's just a screw that goes to the side of the receiver, so it'll just unscrew and pop out there. But you can see that somebody has kind of beat on that with a punch already. That pin's been flattened up a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal. But if you've got one, either use brass punches to begin with, or cup tip punches is more ideal, so that you're not rounding stuff over like they've already done on this gun. And it should knock out relatively easy. They're not extremely difficult. But that screw, what it does is it rides in that little groove right there and retains the pin, keeping it from walking out. The next thing we want to do is pull this screw out here, and that has the, they call it the finger lever pin or some stupid thing like that. But there's a pin that attaches the lever here to your bolt, and you've got to be able to knock that out. And this screw here is what keeps that pin from just falling out. And you see on this side there's a hole in that receiver. That's not an oil hole. That's so you can get a punch in there and knock that pin out. And you put your punch down there in the hole. And that pin will come right out there. One thing, you got to make sure that that's all closed up too. You got to make sure that hole is lined up with that pin there, or you're going to cause problems. Now, what you can do is pull this stuff down here, and you can slide the lever off the back like that, and it'll come out. For basic cleaning and maintenance, you can see this thing's probably not been cleaned in a very, very long time. That screw, you can more or less leave it in there. There's no reason to drive. This is part of the detent that keeps everything locked up in there. Unless you need to replace this stuff, don't take that apart. It's not worth damaging a screw or anything else, because you can get in there and scrub whatever. The next thing that I want to do is pull out your cartridge carrier, your lifter. On the pre-64s, there's two screws. There's one on each side. I think the post-64 is one screw that goes all the way through, if memory serves correctly. I do believe it's just one screw that goes all the way through the receiver. So we'll pull that little guy out of there, and you can see that those screws, yeah, damn it, they have the head stop, or rather the thread stop right there, and that rides inside of the cartridge carrier, and holds it in the receiver like that. From here, it's going to get somewhat interesting. We're going to pull the mainspring off of this. Hammer spring, whatever you want to call it. And the screwdriver is going to break before I get through that guy. Let's go to the next step up. There we go. Yeah, I'm going to go get my T-handle thing. Hold on. These T-handle drivers are I mean, it doesn't have to be anything specific, just any kind. It allows you to put more torque on it and still press in on the screw so the bit doesn't come out. Like that. Even sometimes it will want to sew. I might have to vise this up. This guy's in there. Yeah, it's wanting to jump. Let me pull that little tension screw and loosen that up first. If that's going to help any. Man, this guy is in there. There we go. Just gotta be patient, man. God. Yeah, be patient. This guy's typically kind of tricky. There we go. Your mainspring will come out. There's your screw. It'll loosen that little tension screw there, foist. I guess that kind of should have been a no-brainer, but now that we've got that done, we can take out the this is the hammer screw, and once this comes out, we can take the hammer out, and then the lower tang here will come out of the gun. That guy, pull it out, and then your hammer will come out from the top. I think you can even take that hammer out first and then do the mainspring. It'd probably be easier, to be honest. It's kind of a pain in the butt. You put that mainspring in here and then put it all back together and try and get that hammer down on top of it. You're gonna have to put pressure on that hammer to get that screw back in. Your locking block here can be pushed down, and now your bolt will come out, and then your locking block will come out the top here. Let's see. I don't really want to mess with that right now. We'll finish this. This thing is in here pretty tight on those pre-64s. The post-64s, it just kind of flaps around. Actually, I think it's... yeah, it just kind of flops around. I don't even think it's in a keyway like this one is. Here, what you need to do is I use a brass punch because you don't want to mar up this. You can see that lower tang sits inside of some grooves in there, and like I said, they're typically pretty damn tight, and you don't want to mar it up, so I'll use a brass punch and tap it out that way. If you've got a nylon hammer, that'll work too, if it's small enough. You can see it's coming out. It's pretty tight. I'm gonna do this off camera real quick. That guy's out of there. Your lower tang there. And you've got this little button here is a trigger stop. So if the lever is not completely depressed, you can't pull the trigger, and the lever bumps into that. Now you can pull the trigger all the way. There's a little spring in here, and this little wire spring is both the return pressure for your trigger and the pressure for that little safety stop there. Unless it's broken and needs to be replaced, just leave that guy in there. You can clean all of this stuff without having to get in there. And they can be kind of a pain in the butt to put back and forth. There's something, a little weed or something stuck in. What the hell is that? This thing's definitely had some field use. That's for damn sure. But, I mean, being built in 48, you'd imagine it does. But I'm going to leave that alone. But pin knocks that out, but pull the screw out, pull that, and you got two pins here and here. If you really want to take it out, I'm not going to mess with that right now. There are some few things inside of this receiver that I typically don't mess with. Here, I'll do this just because it's really not that difficult. Your loading gate. This screw here on the side of the receiver is for the loading gate here. Pull that guy out. And then that guy will come out. No big deal. The other thing too is, so the carrier gets operated or is detented by this spring right here on the inside of the gun. I'm not going to pull that out because they can be kind of a pain in the butt to get in, but they do wear out. And that will affect, the spring when it wears out causes all kinds of major feeding issues. And you can do one of two things. You can reshape, I don't know if you can see that little hump right there on the spring, but that's what runs that carrier, makes it snap back and forth. It rides right here on this edge of the cartridge carrier. And that's what makes it snap down and snap up, is that spring coming over center on this little groove. And when it wears out, you can pull it out and reshape it sometimes if it's not bad. You can put that nice kind of a sharp edge back on that spring. And the same thing here, this will wear too, not as fast or as bad, but you can reshape this and put that nice sharp edge on it, and that will allow the carrier to snap back and forth. So if you're having feeding issues, it could be this. That spring in this is kind of a common problem, especially on the newer ones. Instead of a nice machine steel spring in there, the new ones use this stupid bent wire thing, and it just wears the hell out, man. They're pretty damn useless. That's on the post 64s. Another thing we're going to do here is the front sight hood. We're going to tap it off, and it's spring steel, and they're pretty tough to get on and off, man. They're a pain in the butt. Get that off, and now what we'll do is we'll pull the end cap to the tube magazine that has the spring and everything behind it. Put your finger over it as you're loosening this up, because it will just come launching out of there. That one's in there tight too, man. Real tight. Bigger screwdriver. That one fit in there? Yeah, that one will fit in there. That's the one I want. Like I said, these T-handles, what you really get out of those is that I can put a lot of downward pressure on it while I'm unscrewing this to keep that screwdriver bit from jumping out of there, and even then it still kind of wants to. So having the right tools is important to keep you from screwing these guns up. But little pin there, and now this magazine cap, it feels actually like it's kind of pretty well stuck in there, so we're gonna have to give it some assistance, I think. There we go. Kind of knock it loose a little bit. And like I said, it's got a bunch of shmoo in there, man. You're gonna want to hold on to this. Don't just let it go rocketing off on you. There we go. Yep, just like that. Like one of those stupid cans of snake garbage that people do as pranks, but that thing's pretty dirty. And then you can follower will come out behind that. Now we'll take these screws out. These can be a real pain in the ass on the installation, putting it back together. Everything has to be lined up just right for these screws to go back in correctly. And I believe I was told that when they were making these things, they actually have a jig they stick this whole thing in, that they can like lock everything in and then put the screws in. So you might see me bumblefuck with these things a little bit when we go to put it back together. I need a little bit wider blade than that. That's too thin. Let's go to this guy. Yeah, I think that's going to be better. I'm starting to booger up screws a little bit. And that's what happens when you don't have screwdrivers that fit the slot exactly like they're supposed to. That little guy, super tiny, and a lot of times what you'll see is these threads are all kinds of screwed up on the end of them, because people just kind of hammer them in there and don't really pay attention to what they're doing. Same thing here. I think the screwdriver bit's too thick for this one. Let's go down one side. That's a little bit better. One of the other problems that exists with these screws here, particularly these barrel band screws, is that they're super shallow, and they don't want to. The grooves in them, I mean, are just super shallow, and so keeping a blade in there and keeping it from screwing up is kind of a pain in the butt. So take your time. Yeah, be careful, be patient. You don't want to screw your gun up, especially if it's a really good condition gun. Now it's a matter of the mag tube itself coming out, like so. And typically they come out real easy. Sometimes they get stuck. You might have to soak some of either the screws or whatever else in some kind of like Croil or something like that. And you can see they get rusted under there, and that causes them to stick. So, especially if they've been put away wet a couple of times, you know what I mean? Now, you can take this rear barrel band off, and sometimes they need a little bit of coaxing. This front one, what you need to do is rotate it up and then slide it up over that front sight, and then the back one will just clear it. And now you can take the fore end off rather, just like so. And it's had a pretty rough life. We'll have to get in there and try and clean all that crap out as best as we can. And that's really it. Front sight is dovetailed in there. You just knock that out if you need to replace it. Same thing with the back one. And it's got the old standard elevation thing, no big deal. That's really all you need to mess with. The cartridge guides in these guns, another update that they did, post 64 update. The cartridge guides here, so as the cartridge comes out of the mag tube, it comes up and it's got these little, I don't know if you can see the grooves in that thing or not, but these little grooves right here in these cartridge guides, that's where the rim of the case gets pushed up and into right here, and it helps guide the cartridge into the chamber. Well, these are replaceable as they wear out, but their screws are on the inside. There's the back end of the screw, and the same thing on this side for the other one. So you have to have kind of a special tool to get in there, that screw, and take it out. Well, one of the updates that they did is those screws are on the outside of the receiver on the new ones instead of on the inside, so you can get to them from the outside real easy. That spring screw is still on the inside. I think it's still on the inside, even on the new ones. I can't remember. But that's really all there is to the disassembly of the gun. Especially on these older ones, man, take your time, be patient, or you're going to screw something up. Parts are pretty readily available, but if you've got a good example like this one here is actually pretty clean for its age, you don't want to go gnarling up screw heads and stuff like that, because then the gun will never match again. But that's it for now, man. Thanks for watching, guys. Give me a thumbs up, a like, a share. Appreciate it.